Right. Well, my editing skills are crap, but can the same thing be said about the Cloverfield paradox? Stick around and find out. I don't know what that is. Oh, crap. I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions, here with my uncut review of the Cloverfield paradox. I was not actually planning on reviewing this originally this week. My office is in the middle of getting ready to put up another bookshelf and all kinds of stuff, but there was just enough buzz in the Christian Geek Central community about this that I was like, I was on the fence anyway, and an opportunity presented itself for me to see it, so I took it and ran with it. And so anyway, here are my thoughts. First off, the synopsis on IMDb, very brief, reads, "Orbiting a planet on the brink of war, scientists test a device to solve an energy crisis and end up face to face with a dark alternate reality." The story is a sci-fi kind of near-future suspense thriller in space. And the concept of parallel realities is applied in ways that result in some paranoia storytelling, some body horror, which I like, and a handful of just kind of what the crap moments, which, you know, are always fun for me too. The urgency for the scientists to both survive their experiment gone wrong and succeed in their experiment so they can rescue the Earth from the war-inducing energy crisis going on down there, that really kept me feeling pretty suspenseful, or at least kind of slightly on edge for the entire time. So I never lost interest in this movie. And some of the suspense moments that culminated in some body horror stuff, I was just like, no, no, no. so I really enjoyed that. The story is both related to the other Cloverfield movies, and as a byproduct of its story, also explains where the monsters in those movies came from. But that's not its focus, and it's not necessary at all to have seen those movies to enjoy this one. None of the characters from those movies, that I could tell, reappeared in this one. This is a very self-contained story. You know, the Cloverfield movies, now that we've had 3 of them, really what I would kind of compare them to is, you know, like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or what DC's trying to get going, or what everybody seems to be trying to get going these days. You know, it's like the Cloververse. I'm sure that's been coined already, where really, and I would say, you know, less so than, say, Marvel, it's not really dependent or you know, calling back, you know, in major ways to, or in dialogue to, stories that took place in other movies, but it's clearly playing in the same universe, and clearly has the one element that makes an appearance in all 3 of them is giant monsters. And the giant monsters were the focus of the first one, but not really the second one, and definitely not the focus of this one either. It's also not just a science fiction story about, like, interesting sci-fi concepts, you know, and it's not just a suspense movie either. The story touches on some real human drama with some heavy and moving moments. I was kind of like surprised, taken off guard at a moment in the last 30 minutes where I was like, wow, just as a dad, there was some stuff that was relevant to being a father or a mother that really kind of hit me. I was like, oh my gosh, I want to go hug my kids, you know. And it also used humor now and then, sometimes in ways that, and I should say, for my taste, successfully. And, you know, it kind of takes weird things to make me laugh, you know, and this one, I got a few chuckles out of it. Now, sometimes the way the humor was used, it felt psychologically unrealistic. I'm like, they are in really jacked up, you know, heavy circumstances. Why is he joking? Why is that just, it kind of went beyond, it felt like, you know, a defense mechanism. Sometimes you can have a character who you can tell it's just kind of like their nervous defense mechanism to make, you know, little jokes or whatever. This seemed a little too nonchalant. It seemed, you know, like a little step removed from that, and so in that way, it felt psychologically unrealistic to me, given the circumstances, and yet, as I step back and look at, you know, what the joke was, how nonchalant he was, I'm surprised that it didn't take me out of the experience and the drama and the momentum of suspense more than it did. It might have not worked as well for me if it was handled by, say, different actors. I don't know. The story gives a couple of interesting beats that are very brief that explore spiritual concepts. One in which a news program talking head type of person, they have the news on and this guy's talking, and he's written a book called the Cloverfield Paradox, and that's really the reference to the title in the movie, and there's not really anything beyond that. You understand, what he's talking about, because what he's talking about in his book as a talking head becomes relevant to what the scientists are doing, so the connection is clear. But anyway, this talking head is telling the news anchor interviewing him how actual demons could potentially be released into our world if we play around with technology that tampers with space-time, which is what the scientists are doing in this movie. And this made me wonder if, like, a fourth Cloverfield movie would come back to a focus on the giant monsters and identify them as demons brought into the physical world. This movie doesn't get around to doing that. There was just this brief touch on the concept of demons potentially being brought into our world using, scientific experimentation. If you're familiar by any chance with my audio drama work with the Spirit Blade trilogy, which you can get more information at spiritblade.com, then you might rightly imagine that I personally would be very interested in seeing that kind of a movie that explores bringing demons into the physical world, So I would be very interested if they did a fourth Cloverfield movie that really just kind of fully committed to that idea and made the movie about that, but who knows. The other spiritual beat in the movie was when one of the scientists led the group in a prayer right before their attempted experiment. One or two other characters were clearly supportive of this person leading this group prayer, and at least one seemed to think it was just kind of nonsense or whatever. It was an unusual moment because it wasn't called back to later on. It wasn't the beginning of like a character development thing or a commentary, they didn't bring up that this guy was religious really in the rest of the movie. So it felt kind of like a forced moment of some kind of like demographic box checking in the script on behalf of us religious folks. I don't know. And if that's the case, I find it to be a waste of story time. That's what it was for me in this experience. I was just like, they never did anything with that. Why do that? Why waste any time? You've got this precious time and to tell this story and to have a certain momentum. Why have that moment if you're not going to do anything with that later on? So it seemed just kind of like I would cut that out, of the movie. But if my admittedly wild speculation about a fourth movie is correct, then it may have been just one more way to kind of plant the subtle suggestion of these giant monsters having a spiritual origin and in a sense kind of beginning to acclimate audiences, even starting now, to the idea of spiritual realities being mixed in with science fiction. Now, I don't realistically hope that's the case, but it would be cool if they went that direction. I'm not going to talk about the cast, really. I don't really just have anything to say. The cast was all really solid for my taste. Nothing else to really comment on there. As far as stunts and visuals, the visuals looked, I think, great to my eye. CG was almost exclusively used to create non-organic objects, which I think is where CG really works best. I also loved the set design and the way it was lit. Just the look of this movie, the lighting, the color palette, it kind of made the space station look and feel to me a bit like the movie Event Horizon, which was also about the combination of parallel dimensions and spiritual realities. So that was interesting. I wonder how much, if any, influence that movie had on this one. All right, so I always try to ask myself, is there anything of moral, philosophical, or spiritual significance going on in this thing I'm watching or doing or whatever that might stimulate worthwhile thought or conversation? Well, apart from the interesting spiritual beats that I already mentioned, the multiverse hypothesis and quantum physics or quantum mechanics both come to mind as popular sci-fi devices. I actually enjoy the kinds of stories that can be told using these concepts. But I think it's important to realize that these concepts shouldn't be leaned on too heavily or assumptively when doing real-life investigation about reality. The multiverse hypothesis has often been used as an attempted escape hatch when someone committed to atheistic naturalism needs to account for the complexity of human life developing in far less time than naturalistic evolution actually would require to be a sufficient explanation on its own. And quantum physics or quantum mechanics can often be tossed around in conversation to explain all kinds of crazy ideas or possibilities. We don't really talk about how plausible these possibilities are, but quantum mechanics, quantum physics is, oftentimes used in casual or popular level conversation to validate possibilities about the universe in an attempt to kind of remove God from the picture, and I think we need to be careful also, just as theists, that we're not appealing to quantum physics and quantum mechanics when we talk about theological issues. I know that's not as widely done, but there are some people that do that in a kind of a speculative way, and I think that's where right now the popular level conversation should stay, is just kind of like speculation, because it's just the field remains so theoretical. So we don't want to just repeat what a talking head on a 60-minute program said in overly simplified popular language, which can misrepresent the actual explanatory limits of quantum physics. Anyway, I have no idea what your tastes are in movies. If I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, or maybe to another dimension, a parallel dimension, and say, Peter, skip this one. Wait until Redbox, if it ever comes to Redbox. If it doesn't, it'll come somewhere, sometime, other than Netflix. It's a good movie that you'll really enjoy, but not so innovative and amazing that, you need to see it now. And it's definitely not worth dealing with Netflix's poor technical problems that you always seem to run into every time you give that service a chance to try and prove you wrong. Anyway. Netflix and I don't have a good history. This doesn't have an MPAA rating. It's rated TVMA, and I looked at kind of the certifications on IMDb, and just based on my own experience with it, I would describe it as maybe like a really hard PG-13, or maybe kind of on the lighter level of R movies, for irregular profanity and kind of gory body horror type stuff. All right, those are my thoughts. I'd love to get yours in the comments below. And of course, I'd love it if you would join us sometime over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth.